I buried my son alone while my family celebrated across town. My sister texted, "Stop the drama. We need to talk urgently." She wants to use my dead son's $300K trust fund for her daughter's wedding, but they had no idea what I was planning. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how this nightmare began. 3 months ago, my Daniel lost his battle with cancer at 35. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday, March 18th. That same day, my sister Susan decided to throw an engagement party for her precious daughter Emma, because apparently, dead nephews shouldn't interfere with wedding celebrations. Grace, you understand, don't you? Susan had called the night before Daniel's funeral, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We can't cancel Emma's party. The country club is booked solid. Deposits are non-refundable." I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone with one hand and Daniel's favorite coffee mug with the other. The mug that said, "World's Best Son," a gift I'd given him on his last birthday when we still thought chemo might work. "Of course," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Family comes first." The irony wasn't lost on me, even then. So while I sat in the front pew of St. Mary's Chapel, watching Daniel's casket being lowered into the ground with exactly 7 people in attendance, myself, the pastor, 2 funeral home employees, his best friend Mike, his ex-girlfriend Sarah, and Mrs. Henderson from next door. Susan was clinking champagne glasses 20 miles away. 7 people. For a man who'd coached Little League for free, who'd spent his weekends volunteering at the animal shelter, who'd never missed a birthday or holiday. 7 people, because his own family chose canapes over condolences. The funeral director, a kind man named Mr. Peterson, kept glancing at the empty pews behind me. "Mrs. Walker, would you like us to wait a few more minutes? Sometimes family runs late." "This is everyone," I told him, my voice steady as granite. "We can proceed." But oh, how wrong he was about family running late. They weren't late. They were exactly where they wanted to be. That evening, I came home to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Not condolences, not apologies, just a digital avalanche of excuses about why Emma's party was more important than my son's funeral. Mom couldn't make it because of the party, but she sends her love. Emma. "So sorry, Grace, but you know how Susan gets when plans change." My brother Tom. "We'll visit the grave next week. Promise." My youngest sister, Carol. The only honest message came from Susan herself. "Grace, we need to discuss Daniel's estate. Call me Monday." Estate, not inheritance, not Daniel's final wishes. Estate, like my son was a piece of property to be divided and sold. I poured myself a glass of wine, Daniel's favorite red blend that we used to share during our Sunday dinners, and made a decision that would change everything. If my family wanted to treat Daniel's death like a business transaction, then I'd give them exactly what they deserved. But they'd have to wait to find out what that meant. Monday morning arrived with Susan banging on my front door at 7:30 a.m. She didn't even wait for coffee before launching into her agenda. "Grace, we need to talk about Daniel's trust fund," she announced, settling herself on my couch like she owned it. "Emma's wedding is in 6 months, and frankly, that money could make all the difference." I set down my coffee mug slowly, buying time to process the audacity. "Daniel's been dead for 3 days. Susan, and that's tragic, truly. But life goes on." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like Pinterest boards. "Emma's been dreaming of this wedding since she was 12. The venue alone costs $80,000, and that's before flowers, dress, catering. How nice for Emma." My voice could have frozen water. "Tell me, did she enjoy the engagement party? I heard it was lovely." Susan had the grace to look uncomfortable for exactly 2 seconds. "Grace, don't be like that. You know we wanted to be there for Daniel, but sometimes life forces difficult choices." "Difficult choices?" I repeated the words slowly, tasting their bitterness. "Like choosing between burying your nephew and celebrating your daughter's engagement? That's not fair, and you know it." Susan's voice took on that whining quality I remembered from childhood. "The party was planned months ago. Daniel would have understood." Would he? Daniel, who'd called Susan Aunt Selfish behind her back since he was 15? Daniel, who'd once told me that Susan only showed up to family events when she needed something? "Besides," Susan continued, oblivious to my internal commentary, Daniel named you as executor specifically because he trusted you to do what's best for the family. There it was. The real reason for this early morning visit. Susan had been awake all night, probably calculating how to get her hands on that $300K. He left detailed instructions about the trust fund, I said carefully. Susan leaned forward eagerly. Exactly. And I'm sure he'd want Emma to have the most beautiful wedding possible. She's the only grandchild left now, Grace. The only one to carry on the family name. Only grandchild left. As if Daniel had never existed. As if his death was just an inconvenience that cleared the way for Emma's princess fantasy. The trust fund has specific stipulations, I continued, watching Susan's face carefully. Daniel was very particular about how that money should be used. Well, what are they? Susan practically bounced in her seat. I'm sure we can work something out. Maybe a loan against the inheritance? Emma's fiancé has excellent credit. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, ostensibly for more coffee, but really to hide my expression. Susan's greed was even worse than I'd anticipated. The money is locked for 6 months, I called over my shoulder. Standard probate procedures. 6 months? Susan's voice cracked. But the wedding is in 6 months. Grace, you have to do something. Can't you petition the court? Speed things up? I returned with my coffee and sat back down, studying my sister's desperate face. She'd gained weight since I'd seen her last, probably from all those stress-eating sessions over wedding planning. Her highlights needed touching up, and there were lines around her eyes that expensive creams couldn't hide. Why is Emma's wedding so urgent? I asked innocently. Can't they wait a year or two? Susan's face went through several color changes. Well, they're very much in love. Young love can't wait, you know. How romantic. I sipped my coffee. And expensive, apparently. Grace, please. This wedding means everything to Emma, and to me. After everything I've been through with the divorce, seeing my daughter happy, Susan's eyes filled with crocodile tears. Everything she'd been through. Susan's divorce had been her own fault. Cheating on her husband with his business partner tends to have consequences. But somehow, in Susan's mind, she was always the victim. I'll consider it, I lied smoothly. Let me review Daniel's exact wishes and see what options we have. Susan brightened immediately. Really? Oh, Grace, thank you. Emma will be so thrilled. I knew we could count on you. As I walked her to the door, Susan turned back with an afterthought. Oh, and Grace? Maybe don't mention this conversation to the rest of the family yet. You know how they get about money discussions. Translation: don't tell anyone else about the $300K until I figure out how to claim it all for myself. Of course not, I agreed, already planning exactly who I'd be calling first. That afternoon, I drove to Evergreen Memorial Gardens, where Daniel rested in a plot I'd chosen myself. The headstone wouldn't be ready for another month, but I'd placed fresh flowers and a small American flag. Daniel had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before the cancer diagnosis. Well, sweetheart, I said, settling onto the small folding chair I'd brought. Your Aunt Susan visited today. She sends her love and her invoices. The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and I could almost hear Daniel's laugh. He'd had the most wonderful laugh, deep and infectious, the kind that made strangers smile even when they didn't know what was funny. She wants your trust fund for Emma's wedding. Can you believe that? Your cousin, who couldn't be bothered to send a sympathy card, wants to wear a $15,000 dress bought with your money. I opened the folder I'd brought. Daniel's will and trust documents, along with the letter he'd written to me during his last week. Mom, the letter began in his careful handwriting. If you're reading this, then the cancer won. I'm sorry for leaving you alone to deal with our family. I know how they are, especially Susan. I've set up the trust fund with very specific instructions because I know she'll come sniffing around the money before my body's even cold. He'd known. Of course he'd known. Daniel had always been too smart for his own good. The $300,000 is meant for education and medical expenses for underprivileged children, the letter continued. I've already contacted the Children's Hospital Foundation and set up the framework. Susan will probably try to convince you that I'd want Emma to have it for her wedding. Don't believe her. I wouldn't give Susan $1 to save her life, let alone $300K for her daughter's princess party. I smiled through my tears. Even from the grave, Daniel was still protecting me from our family's greed. There's one more thing, Mom. I've given you full discretionary power over how and when the money is distributed. If our family gives you any grief about my final wishes, feel free to remind them that kindness during life earns consideration after death. They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences. The letter was signed with a simple, "Love always, your son who knew better." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the folder. Daniel had given me more than just money. He'd given me permission to finally stand up to the family that had treated us both as afterthoughts for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Aunt Grace, Mom told me the amazing news about Uncle Daniel's gift for my wedding. Can we go dress shopping together this weekend? I want to show you the one I've been dreaming about." The one she'd been dreaming about, while I was dreaming about my son coming home from his last chemotherapy session. I typed back, "We'll talk soon, sweetie." Another text came in immediately. "OMG, yes, I can't wait. This is going to be the most perfect wedding ever. Uncle Daniel would be so happy to see us celebrating life instead of being sad." Celebrating life, is that what we were calling it? I stood up, brushing grass from my skirt, and placed my hand on the temporary marker where Daniel's headstone would go. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I understand the assignment. Susan wants to play games with your memory? Well, she picked the wrong woman to mess with. Your mother didn't raise any fools." On the drive home, I made a mental list of phone calls to make. The lawyer who'd helped Daniel set up the trust, the financial advisor who managed the account, the director of the Children's Hospital Foundation who was expecting Daniel's donation. And then, just for fun, I'd call my other siblings and let them know about Susan's morning visit. After all, she'd asked me not to mention it to anyone. Good thing I'd never been particularly obedient. Tuesday evening brought the family phone tree to my doorstep. Tom arrived first, followed by Carol 20 minutes later. They settled into my living room with the same hungry expressions Susan had worn the day before. "Grace," Tom began, his car salesman voice in full effect, "Susan mentioned you might need help navigating Daniel's estate situation." How thoughtful. I offered them coffee, which they declined. Apparently, this was meant to be a quick intervention. Carol leaned forward with her practiced, concerned expression, the same one she'd used when convincing our mother to sign over power of attorney 3 years ago. "We just want to make sure you're not making any emotional decisions during this difficult time." Emotional decisions? Like burying my son without his family present? "What kind of decisions are you worried about?" I asked, genuinely curious about their strategy. Tom and Carol exchanged glances. Clearly they'd rehearsed this conversation. "Well," Tom cleared his throat, "Susan mentioned that Daniel left some assets that might benefit the whole family. We think it would be wise to distribute those assets sooner rather than later, for tax purposes." Tax purposes. How creative. And what assets would those be? I kept my voice neutral, though I was enjoying watching them squirm. "The trust fund," Carol said bluntly. "Susan said it was substantial." "Did she now?" I sipped my coffee slowly. "What else did Susan tell you?" Another glance between the siblings. Tom took the lead again. "Look, Grace, we know Daniel meant well, but he was young and probably didn't understand the tax implications of a large inheritance. If we divide the money now among all the grandchildren, everyone benefits." "All the grandchildren?" I raised an eyebrow. "Tom, your kids are in their 30s and 40s. Carol, yours are in their 20s with good jobs. Emma is the only one getting married." "That's not the point," Carol protested. "It's about fairness. Daniel wouldn't want to play favorites." Wouldn't he? Daniel, who'd called Tom's oldest son a spoiled brat who's never worked a day in his life. Daniel, who'd once told me that Carol's daughter was too busy taking selfies to notice anyone else exists. "Besides," Tom added, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I remembered from childhood, "you're not getting any younger, Grace. Managing a large sum of money can be stressful. We could help take that burden off your hands." The burden of managing my own son's final wishes. "That's very considerate," I said, "but I think I can handle it." Carol's face tightened. "Grace, be reasonable. You live alone, you're in your 60s, and you just lost your son. This isn't the time to be stubborn." Stubborn? I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. Like when I was stubborn about attending Daniel's funeral instead of Emma's engagement party. The room went silent. Tom studied his shoes, while Carol suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. "Grace," Carol finally said, her voice softer, "we know you're upset about Saturday, but families sometimes have to make difficult choices." "Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop right there. You want to talk about difficult choices? Let me tell you about difficult choices. I stood up and walked to the mantel where Daniel's purple heart sat next to his college graduation photo. Difficult choices are deciding whether to take your son off life support. Difficult choices are choosing a casket for someone who should have outlived you. Difficult choices are sitting alone at a funeral because your family chose champagne over compassion. When I turned back around, both siblings looked uncomfortable. Now, I continued, my voice steady as steel, you want to make another difficult choice about my son's money. The money he specifically designated for charity work with sick children. The money he trusted me to distribute according to his wishes. Tom's face reddened. Susan said he left it to the family. Susan lied. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel left explicit instructions about that money, and not one penny was intended for weddings, vacations, or any other family expenses. Carol stood up abruptly. Fine, be selfish. Keep it all for yourself, but don't expect us to support you when you're old and need care. The threat was so predictable, I almost laughed. Carol, sweetie, when have any of you ever supported me? When Daniel was dying, did you visit? When I was handling funeral arrangements alone, did you offer help? When I was grieving, did you call to check on me? She opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't finished. The answer is no, to all of it. So your threats about future abandonment ring a bit hollow, considering you've already mastered the art of absence. Tom and Carol left without another word. But I knew this was far from over. Susan would regroup, probably involve the lawyer she'd consulted during her divorce. But I had something they didn't expect. Daniel's actual will, his trust documents, and a burning desire to honor his memory properly. Let them come. I was ready for war. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected visitor, Emma herself, standing on my doorstep with red-rimmed eyes and a Starbucks cup clutched in her shaking hands. Aunt Grace, can we talk? Her voice was smaller than I'd heard it since she was 10. I let her in, noting how she avoided eye contact and perched nervously on the edge of the couch. Emma had always been Susan's pride and joy. Pretty, popular, and perfectly willing to let her mother orchestrate her life. But today, she looked lost. Mom told me about the trust fund, she began, then stopped, pressing her lips together. She said Uncle Daniel wanted to help with my wedding. Did she now? I settled into my chair, studying my niece's face. What else did she tell you? Emma's hands twisted around her coffee cup. She said you were being difficult about releasing the money, that you didn't understand how important this wedding is to our family. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. Years of raising Daniel had taught me that young people often revealed more when you didn't rush to fill the quiet spaces. But, Emma's voice cracked, but Uncle Daniel never even met Brandon. They only talked once at Christmas, and Uncle Daniel seemed, I don't know, not impressed. That was putting it mildly. Daniel had privately called Brandon a trust fund baby with the personality of wet cardboard. But I didn't share that observation. Tell me about Brandon, I said instead. Emma's face lit up for the first time since she'd arrived. He's wonderful, Aunt Grace. His family owns 3 country clubs, and he went to Princeton, and he's so handsome. Mom says I'm lucky to catch someone from such a good family. And what do you say? The question seemed to surprise her. What do you mean? I mean, what do you think about Brandon? Not what your mother thinks, not what his family owns. What do you think? Emma stared into her coffee cup for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I think I'm scared. Of what? Of everything. The wedding, the marriage, the pressure to be perfect. The words tumbled out in a rush. Mom's been planning this wedding since I got engaged, and it's gotten so big and expensive and complicated. Brandon's mother keeps adding people to the guest list, and Mom keeps adding things to compete with her. And nobody asked me what I wanted. What do you want? I wanted a small ceremony. Maybe at the beach, just family and close friends. I wanted to write my own vows and have Uncle Daniel walk me down the aisle since Grandpa's gone. Her voice broke completely. But now Uncle Daniel's gone too, and Mom says we can't have the wedding I wanted because Brandon's family would think we're cheap. I reached over and handed her the box of tissues from the side table. Emma, sweetie, whose wedding is this? Mine, but... She wiped her eyes. But Mom's paying for it. Or she was, until she found out about Uncle Daniel's money. Now she says this is my chance to have the wedding of my dreams. But it's not my dream, Aunt Grace. It's hers. There it was. The truth that Susan would never admit. This wedding wasn't about Emma's happiness. It was about Susan's status, her chance to compete with Brandon's wealthy family, her opportunity to prove she belonged in their social circle. Emma, can I ask you something personal? She nodded. Do you love Brandon? Another long pause. I love the idea of him. I love how he makes me feel safe and taken care of. I love that he chose me out of all the girls he could have had. She twisted her engagement ring, a massive diamond that probably cost more than most people's cars. But sometimes, I wonder if he'd notice if I were replaced by someone else who looked similar and agreed with everything he said. My heart broke for this girl who'd been raised to believe her worth was measured by her ability to catch and keep a wealthy husband. Emma, your Uncle Daniel left you something in his will. Her eyes widened. Money for the wedding? Not money. Advice. I pulled out Daniel's letter and found the section I was looking for. He wrote, "If Emma is reading this, I hope she remembers that she's smart enough to make her own choices and strong enough to stand by them. Don't let anyone else write the story of your life, especially not your mother." Emma started crying again, but these were different tears. He said that? He did. He also said that if you ever needed someone to talk to about difficult family situations, you should call his friend Sarah. She's a therapist who specializes in helping young women navigate family pressure. I wrote down Sarah's number and handed it to Emma. Think about what you really want, sweetie. Not what your mother wants, not what Brandon's family expects, but what would make you truly happy. Emma hugged me tightly before she left. Thank you, Aunt Grace. For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe. After she was gone, I called Sarah and gave her a heads up about a possible call from Emma. Then I sat back and smiled. Susan wanted to use Daniel's memory to fund her social climbing ambitions? Well, Daniel was about to reach back from the grave and mess with her plans in ways she never saw coming. Friday afternoon, my phone rang with the call I'd been expecting all week. Grace, we need to meet. Today. Susan's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. Emma's been asking questions about the wedding, and frankly, your influence isn't helpful. My influence? I almost laughed. You mean encouraging her to think for herself? I mean filling her head with doubts about Brandon and the wedding. She came home crying yesterday, talking nonsense about postponing everything. Do you have any idea what that would cost us? Cost them. Not cost Emma's happiness or peace of mind, but cost them money and social standing. Where would you like to meet? I asked, already knowing this conversation was going to be delicious. Café Luna, 1 hour. Café Luna was Susan's favorite restaurant. Upscale enough to make her feel important, but public enough that she assumed I wouldn't make a scene. She'd always underestimated me. I arrived first and chose a table in the center of the dining room, close enough to other patrons that Susan would have to control her voice, but far enough away that we could speak freely. When she walked in 10 minutes later, I could see the storm brewing in her eyes. Let's get straight to the point, she said, without preamble, sliding into the chair across from me. What did you tell Emma? I told her the truth about Daniel's will. I signaled the waitress for coffee, something you apparently forgot to mention. Susan's face went through several color changes. What truth? That Daniel never intended his money to fund Emma's wedding, that he specifically designated it for charity work with sick children, that you lied to your entire family about his final wishes. The waitress appeared with our coffee, giving Susan a moment to compose herself. When we were alone again, she leaned forward with her most intimidating expression. Grace, I don't think you understand the situation here. Emma's engagement to Brandon is the best thing that could happen to our family. His father owns half the commercial real estate in the county. His connections could help all of us. Help you? You mean, help all of us, she repeated firmly. Tom's struggling with his dealership, Carol's kids need college funds, and well, you're alone now, Grace. When you're older and need care, connections like the Ashford family could make all the difference. The Ashford family. So that was Brandon's last name. I made a mental note to look them up later. And all it costs is betraying my son's final wishes? I sipped my coffee slowly. What a bargain. Susan's mask finally slipped. Your son is dead, Grace. Nothing you do with that money will bring him back. But Emma's alive, and this wedding could secure her future. Why can't you see that? Because Emma doesn't want this wedding. The words hung between us like a challenge. She wants something small and meaningful, not a three-ring circus designed to impress people who don't care about her happiness. Emma wants what's best for her, even if she's too young to understand what that is. The Ashford family doesn't marry down, Grace. This is Emma's one chance to marry well, and I won't let your grief ruin it. My grief. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. Tell me, Susan, what do you know about my grief? When did you last ask how I was holding up? When did you call to check if I needed anything? When did you show even the slightest interest in my well-being after losing my only child? She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. The answer is never. You've shown more concern about Daniel's money in the past week than you showed about Daniel during his entire illness. You couldn't even be bothered to attend his funeral, but you want to steal his legacy to throw a party. I'm not stealing anything, Susan protested. Family money should benefit the family. Then you should be thrilled to know that Daniel's money will benefit hundreds of families. Families with sick children who need medical care and educational support. Just like Daniel intended. Susan's eyes narrowed. You can't be serious. You're really going to give $300,000 to strangers instead of your own niece? I'm going to honor my son's wishes instead of funding your social ambitions. If you want a $100,000 wedding for Emma, then you figure out how to pay for it yourself. Susan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Several nearby diners looked over with interest. This isn't over, Grace. Emma is my daughter, and I won't let you poison her against her own wedding. There are legal ways to challenge a will, especially when the executor isn't acting in the family's best interests. Try it, I said calmly. I'd love to explain to a judge why Daniel's aunt thinks she deserves his money more than the sick children he wanted to help. Susan stormed out without another word, but her threat lingered in the air. She was going to lawyer up, which meant I needed to do the same. Good thing Daniel had introduced me to the best estate attorney in the state during his final months. Sarah Matthews didn't just handle wills. She specialized in protecting them from greedy relatives. Let the real war begin. Monday morning brought Sarah Matthews to my kitchen table, her briefcase full of legal documents and her expression grimmer than I'd expected. Grace, I need you to understand what we're up against, she said, spreading papers across my table. Susan hired Richard Blackstone. The name meant nothing to me, but Sarah's tone suggested it should. Should I be worried? Blackstone specializes in contesting wills, particularly when substantial amounts are involved. He's expensive, ruthless, and very good at what he does. Sarah pulled out a thick folder. He's already filed a preliminary motion claiming you're not competent to execute Daniel's wishes due to grief-induced mental distress. I laughed. I actually laughed. Mental distress? For wanting to honor my son's charitable intentions? Blackstone's argument is that no rational person would give away $300,000 to strangers while family members have legitimate financial needs. He'll paint you as a grieving mother making emotional decisions. And Emma's wedding dress is a legitimate financial need? Sarah smiled grimly. That's exactly what we'll ask the judge. But Grace, there's something else. Blackstone has requested a psychological evaluation. He wants a court-appointed psychiatrist to determine your mental capacity. The audacity took my breath away. Susan was literally trying to have me declared mentally unfit because I wouldn't fund her daughter's fairy tale wedding. Can they do that? They can request it. Whether the judge grants it depends on how we present our case. Sarah leaned back in her chair. The good news is that Daniel's will is ironclad. He was very specific about his intentions, and he had 2 witnesses, plus a notary. The bad news is that family challenges can drag on for months, even years. What do you need from me? Everything. Daniel's medical records showing he was mentally competent when he wrote the will. Documentation of his charitable interests while he was alive. Proof that he specifically chose the Children's Hospital Foundation. And Grace, Sarah's expression softened. I need you to be prepared for this to get ugly. Susan's already given statements to Blackstone's investigators about your erratic behavior since Daniel's death. What erratic behavior? According to Susan, you've become withdrawn, paranoid, and hostile toward family members who are only trying to help. She claims you've isolated yourself and made irrational financial decisions. I poured myself more coffee, my hands surprisingly steady. You mean like refusing to fund a $100,000 wedding for a niece whose fiancé Daniel actively disliked? Exactly like that. But Blackstone will spin it differently. Sarah gathered her papers. I'm scheduling a meeting with Dr. Patricia Monroe. She's a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in competency evaluations. If we're going to beat Susan to the punch, we need our own expert witness. After Sarah left, I sat in my quiet kitchen and wondered how my family had become such strangers. When had love been replaced by greed? When had Daniel's death become an opportunity instead of a tragedy? My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Aunt Grace, Mom hired a lawyer. She says you're sick and need help. Is that true? I typed back, I'm fine, sweetie. Just protecting Uncle Daniel's wishes like he asked me to. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, can I come see you this weekend? I need to tell you something important. Of course. Saturday afternoon? Yes. And Aunt Grace? I think I know why Mom's so desperate for this money. It's not just about the wedding. I stared at that last message for a long time, wondering what other secrets my family had been keeping. Saturday afternoon, Emma arrived with puffy eyes and a manila envelope clutched in her hands. She sat on my couch like she was afraid it might bite her. Aunt Grace, I found something in Mom's papers. She handed me the envelope with shaking hands. I was looking for my birth certificate for the marriage license, and I found these in her desk. Inside were credit card statements, loan documents, and notices from collection agencies, all addressed to Susan Walker. Emma, sweetie, I don't think I should be looking at your mother's private financial information. She owes $80,000 in credit card debt, Emma said quietly. The house has a second mortgage she took out last year, and there's a notice about her car being repossessed if she doesn't make payments. I scanned the documents, my heart sinking with each page. Susan wasn't just greedy, she was desperate, financially drowning and seeing Daniel's trust fund as her life preserver. There's more. Emma pulled out another set of papers. Brandon's family isn't paying for anything. His mother told Mom that the bride's family traditionally handles all wedding expenses. Mom's been lying about their contribution. The pieces clicked into place. Susan had promised Emma a fairy tale wedding, probably assuming she could charm the money out of me through guilt and family pressure. When that failed, she'd turned to legal intimidation. Emma, does Brandon know about your mother's financial situation? I don't think so. His family is very, she searched for the word, traditional. They believe in proper social standing and financial stability. If they knew Mom was broke, they might question whether I'm suitable for their son. And how would you feel about that? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Relieved, maybe? Aunt Grace, I've been thinking about what you said, about what I really want. I called that therapist, Sarah, that Uncle Daniel mentioned. How did that go? She helped me realize that I've been planning my mother's dream wedding, not mine, and that maybe I'm marrying Brandon for the same reason, because it's what Mom wants, not because it's what makes me happy. I set the financial documents aside and focused on my niece's face. What would make you happy? I want to postpone the wedding. Take time to figure out if Brandon and I are really compatible, or if we're just going through the motions because it looks good on paper. Tears started flowing again. But if I postpone, Mom will lose all the deposits, money she doesn't have. Sweetie, your mother's financial problems are not your responsibility. But she's my mom. I can't just let her drown. The loyalty was admirable, but misplaced. Susan had created this mess through years of overspending and social climbing. Now she was trying to drag Emma and Daniel's memory down with her. Emma, what if there was a way to help your mother without sacrificing Uncle Daniel's charitable goals? She looked up hopefully. What do you mean? What if Daniel's foundation could hire your mother as a fundraising coordinator? It would be legitimate work with a real salary, and it would give her a chance to rebuild her finances honestly. Would she do that? I thought about Susan's pride, her need to appear successful, her complete lack of experience in nonprofit work. Probably not, but we can offer. Emma left that afternoon with a plan to talk honestly with Brandon about postponing the wedding and with Susan about alternative career options. I doubted either conversation would go well, but at least Emma was finally thinking for herself. That evening, my phone rang. Susan's name flashed on the screen, and I could practically feel the fury radiating through the device. "How dare you poison my daughter against her own wedding?" she screamed before I could even say hello. Emma made her own decision, Susan. She's confused and grieving. She needs guidance, not some therapist filling her head with nonsense about independence. She needs to marry someone she loves, not someone who improves your social status. You have no idea what you're talking about, Susan snarled. Emma's wedding is her chance at a better life. Brandon's family has connections, money, influence, things that actually matter in the real world. Does Brandon know you're broke? The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. I don't know what Emma told you, Susan finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. But my financial situation is temporary. The wedding will solve everything. By bankrupting Daniel's charity? By securing Emma's future, something you apparently care nothing about. The call ended abruptly, leaving me with the distinct impression that Susan's legal battle was about to get much more personal. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected alliance to my doorstep. Tom and Carol stood on my porch, but their expressions weren't hostile this time. Grace, we need to talk, Tom said, his usual salesman confidence replaced by genuine concern. About Susan. I let them in, curious about this development. We had coffee with Susan yesterday, Carol began, settling into the same chair she'd occupied during our previous confrontation. She's not well, Grace, financially or emotionally. Emma told you about the debt? Tom nodded grimly. She owes money to people who don't accept payment plans, the kind of people who make house calls when you're late. That was news to me. Emma hadn't mentioned anything about dangerous creditors. How bad is it? I asked. Bad enough that she borrowed $15,000 from Tom last month, Carol said. Money he needed for his own business, and she asked me for another $10,000 yesterday. So Susan's desperation ran deeper than credit cards and second mortgages. She was borrowing from family members who couldn't afford to lose the money. We came to apologize, Tom continued, and to ask for your help. My help? Not with money, Carol said quickly. With Susan. She's obsessed with this wedding, with getting Daniel's trust fund. She's talking about hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on you, about proving you influenced Daniel when he was sick. She's already hired Richard Blackstone. We know, and we think she's making a terrible mistake. Tom leaned forward. Grace, we were wrong about the trust fund. Dead wrong. Daniel's money should go where Daniel wanted it to go. But Susan's going to destroy herself fighting you. This was an interesting development. What do you want me to do? Talk to her, Carol pleaded. Make her understand that this legal battle will only make things worse. She can't afford Blackstone's fees, and if she loses, she'll owe him money on top of everything else. And if I refuse? Then Susan will probably lose her house, her car, and her relationship with Emma. And Emma will blame herself for all of it. The manipulation was subtler this time, but still manipulation. They weren't asking me to give up Daniel's money. They were asking me to save Susan from the consequences of her own choices. I'll think about it, I said finally. After they left, I called Sarah Matthews and arranged to meet at her office. If Susan was escalating her investigation, I needed to know what she might find. Grace, is there anything in your past that Blackstone could use against you? Sarah asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. Any financial irregularities? Legal troubles? Mental health issues? Nothing significant. Daniel and I lived quietly after his father died. I managed my finances conservatively, never had any legal problems. What about your relationship with Daniel during his illness? Did you have any disagreements about medical decisions? His will? His care? We agreed on everything. Daniel was very clear about his wishes. Sarah made notes. What about other family members? Did any of them express concerns about Daniel's mental state when he wrote the will? They barely visited when he was sick. Susan came twice, Tom maybe 3 times. Carol sent cards. The memory still stung. They didn't care enough to worry about his mental state then. Good. That helps our case. Sarah set down her pen. Grace, I have to ask. Are you absolutely certain you want to fight this? Blackstone's fees alone could drain a significant portion of the trust fund. Daniel trusted me to honor his wishes. I won't let his family's greed override his final act of charity. Then we fight. But I want you prepared for what's coming. Blackstone will attack your character, your judgment, your relationship with Daniel. He'll make you sound like a manipulative woman who influenced a dying man for her own purposes. What purposes? I don't get any money from this. That's what makes you dangerous to his case. You have no obvious motive except honoring Daniel's wishes. Blackstone will have to create one. I left Sarah's office feeling like I was preparing for war, which I supposed I was. That evening, Emma called with an update on her conversation with Brandon. He was not happy about postponing, she said carefully. He thinks I'm having pre-wedding jitters and that I should trust his judgment about what's best for our future. And what do you think? I think he didn't listen to a word I said about wanting to slow down and really get to know each other. He just kept talking about how disappointed his parents would be and how much money we'd lose on deposits. Sounds familiar. Exactly like Mom. Aunt Grace, I think I've been engaged to a male version of my mother. Progress. Thursday morning brought the shock that changed everything. I was reviewing trust fund documents when my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a woman I'd never seen before. Mid-30s, professional attire, carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Walker? I'm Jennifer Morrison, investigative journalist with the Tribune. I'd like to ask you some questions about the Ashford family. Brandon's family. Why would a journalist be interested in them? I'm not sure I can help you, I said carefully. I'm working on a story about charity fraud and tax evasion. The Ashford Foundation has been under federal investigation for the past 6 months. My blood ran cold. What kind of investigation? They've been claiming tax deductions for charitable donations that never reach the intended recipients. We're talking about millions of dollars over the past 5 years. Jennifer pulled out a tablet and showed me copies of IRS documents. The foundation's director is Brandon Ashford Sr. His son, Brandon Jr., is listed as the assistant director. Both are facing potential federal charges. I sank into my porch chair. The implications washing over me. Does Emma know? I doubt it. The investigation has been kept quiet pending the outcome. But Mrs. Walker, there's more. The Ashford family has been targeting wealthy widows and families with substantial inheritances. They arrange marriages or partnerships, then gradually gain access to the money for their fraudulent operations. You think Brandon is deliberately targeting Emma? I think Brandon's family identified your niece as someone with potential access to significant funds. The timing of their engagement, right after Daniel's diagnosis became public knowledge, is suspicious. I thought about Emma's description of their whirlwind courtship, how Brandon had swept her off her feet at a charity gala just 3 months after Daniel entered hospice care, how he'd proposed after only 4 months of dating, how his family had immediately insisted on an expensive wedding with extensive media coverage. What do you need from me? I asked. Information about the trust fund, how much money is involved, who has access, what safeguards are in place. If the Ashfords are planning to defraud your family, we need to document their methods. I gave Jennifer the basic facts about Daniel's trust and Susan's legal challenge. She took notes rapidly, her expression growing more concerned. Mrs. Walker, your sister's lawsuit might actually be helping the Ashfords. If she succeeds in getting the money distributed to family members, it becomes much easier for them to access through marriage. But Emma's having doubts about the wedding. Then she needs to know the truth about her fiancé's family immediately. Mrs. Walker, if Emma marries Brandon Ashford, she could be charged as an accessory to federal fraud, even if she had no knowledge of their activities. I called Emma immediately after Jennifer left. Sweetie, I need you to come over right now. There's something about Brandon's family you need to know. I can't. Aunt Grace, Brandon's taking me to meet with the caterer, and then we have dinner with his parents. Can it wait until tomorrow? Emma, this is urgent. Cancel your plans and come here now. Something in my voice must have convinced her. Okay, I'll be there in an hour. When Emma arrived, I introduced her to Jennifer Morrison and watched my niece's face go white as the journalist explained the federal investigation. That's impossible, Emma whispered. Brandon's family are respected philanthropists. They've donated millions to charities. They've claimed to donate millions, Jennifer corrected. But the money never reached the intended recipients. It was funneled into offshore accounts controlled by the family. Emma looked like she might be sick. Brandon wouldn't be involved in something like that. Emma, I said gently, how much does Brandon know about Daniel's trust fund? Everything. I told him all about it after Mom explained how Uncle Daniel wanted to help with our wedding. Jennifer and I exchanged glances. What exactly did you tell him? I asked. About the $300,000? About how you were the executor? About Mom's lawsuit to get the money distributed to family members? Emma's voice grew smaller with each word. Oh, God. He asked so many questions about the legal process, about how long it would take, about whether the money could be accessed before the wedding. Emma, Jennifer said carefully, I need to ask you something. Has Brandon or his family suggested any changes to your financial arrangements? Joint bank accounts, power of attorney, anything like that? His mother suggested I set up a joint investment account with Brandon before the wedding. She said it would show the banks that we're serious about building a life together. Emma was crying now. She even gave me the name of a specific financial advisor to use. Jennifer made a note. That financial advisor is probably part of their operation. Once you had joint accounts, Brandon would have access to any money you received from the trust fund. I need to call this off, Emma said, her voice stronger now. The wedding, the engagement, everything. I need to get away from them. Carefully, Jennifer warned. If the Ashfords realize you know about the investigation, they might escalate their timeline. Can you act normal for a few more days while we coordinate with federal agents? Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. What about Mom's lawsuit? I smiled for the first time in days. Oh, that just became a blessing in disguise. If Susan succeeds in freezing the trust fund pending legal review, the Ashfords can't touch a penny of it. So Uncle Daniel protected us even from beyond the grave? Your uncle was always smarter than the rest of us gave him credit for. 2 weeks later, I sat in Judge Harrison's courtroom watching Susan's case crumble in real time. Richard Blackstone's confident demeanor had evaporated when federal agents served him with a subpoena that morning, and Susan looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 days. Your Honor, Sarah Matthews addressed the court, we move to dismiss all challenges to the trust fund based on new evidence that has come to light regarding the petitioner's motives. Blackstone stood up shakily. Objection, Your Honor. The federal investigation has no bearing on my client's legitimate concerns about the executor's mental capacity. Actually, it does, Sarah continued smoothly. Mrs. Susan Walker's daughter was engaged to Brandon Ashford Jr., who is currently under federal indictment for charity fraud. Mrs. Walker's sudden urgency to liquidate the trust fund coincides exactly with her daughter's engagement to a known criminal. The judge raised an eyebrow. Ms. Matthews, are you suggesting that Mrs. Walker was aware of Mr. Ashford's criminal activities? No, Your Honor. We're suggesting that Mrs. Walker was being manipulated by the Ashford family, who targeted her daughter specifically to gain access to the trust fund money. Mrs. Walker's lawsuit, while well-intentioned, would have made it much easier for the Ashfords to steal the money intended for sick children. Susan turned to stare at me, her face a mixture of shock and horror. Clearly, no one had explained the Ashford situation to her. Your Honor, Sarah continued, the executor, Mrs. Grace Walker, actually protected the trust fund from federal criminals by refusing to liquidate it prematurely. Her actions, which appeared stubborn to the family, were actually prescient. Judge Harrison looked over his glasses at Blackstone. Counselor, do you have any response to these allegations? Blackstone was flipping through papers frantically. Your Honor, my client was unaware of any federal investigation. She was simply trying to ensure her daughter's future happiness. By stealing money from sick children to fund a wedding to a criminal, Sarah added helpfully. Objection. Sustained. Ms. Matthews, please keep your editorial comments to yourself. The judge reviewed the documents for what felt like hours before finally speaking. Based on the evidence presented, it appears that Daniel Walker's trust fund was properly established and that his executor has acted in accordance with his expressed wishes. The challenge to Mrs. Grace Walker's competency is dismissed. Furthermore, given the federal investigation into the intended beneficiary family, this court commends Mrs. Walker for her diligence in protecting charitable funds from potential fraud. Susan's shoulders sagged in defeat. As we filed out of the courtroom, she approached me hesitantly. Grace, I'm sorry. I had no idea about Brandon's family. Is Emma okay? Emma's fine. She's postponed the wedding indefinitely and started therapy to work through the manipulation she experienced. And the money? Goes exactly where Daniel intended. The Children's Hospital Foundation will help hundreds of families with sick children receive the medical care and educational support they need. Susan nodded slowly. He would have liked that. Yes, he would have. We stood there awkwardly for a moment before Susan spoke again. Grace, about my debt situation. Sarah Matthews knows several nonprofit organizations that need experienced fundraisers. The pay isn't enormous, but it's steady work with good people. You'd recommend me for a job? After everything, I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the greedy woman who'd tried to steal my son's legacy, but the frightened woman who'd made terrible choices out of desperation. Daniel believed in second chances. I said finally, I think I can manage one. 6 months later, I received a photo in the mail. Emma, looking radiant in a simple white dress, standing on a beach next to a young man in a Coast Guard uniform. The note on the back read, Aunt Grace, meet my husband, Michael. We had the wedding I always dreamed of, small, meaningful, and paid for with our own money. Uncle Daniel would have approved. Love, Emma. That evening, I visited Daniel's grave with fresh flowers and the Children's Hospital newsletter featuring a story about the Daniel Walker Memorial Fund. 37 children had received medical assistance in just 6 months. Well, sweetheart, I said, arranging the flowers on his headstone. Your plan worked perfectly. The family learned some valuable lessons about greed and consequences. Emma found genuine love, and dozens of sick children are getting the help they need. The wind rustled through the oak trees. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.